Our tale begins with a chap named Silas, a man whose primary occupation seemed to be eligible bachelor on a never-ending quest. He wasn't just looking for a wife. He was on a veritable pilgrimage for perfection, trotting the globe like a picky connoisseur at a buffet where nothing quite hit the spot. Young, old, rich, poor, pretty, plain, Silas had seen them all and with a sigh and a shake of his well-coiffed head dismissed them. He was, to put it mildly, the kind of man who'd find a flaw in a diamond, probably complaining it was too shiny. One blustery evening, nursing a lukewarm ale in a creaky tavern, Silas lamented his fate to a long-suffering acquaintance, Barnaby. "It's not that I'm unreasonable, Barnaby," he'd whine, adjusting his cravat, "it's just they lack a certain sparkle. A unique quality, something that truly sets them apart, you see." Barnaby, who'd heard this spiel more times than he'd had hot dinners, just nodded, wisely suspecting Silas's idea of sparkle probably involved actual gold. Silas, oblivious, dreamt of a bride who wasn't just a companion but an acquisition, a testament to his superior taste and, dare we say, fortune. Slowly, Alara began to notice. His gaze lingered a little too long on her arm, his touch a little too proprietary when he accidentally brushed against it. Compliments about her dress often ended with, "and it sets off your arm so wonderfully." A quiet unease started to settle in her heart. Was it her he loved, or this gleaming, inanimate part of her? She'd catch him sometimes, just staring at the arm with an intensity that was more covetous than affectionate. The golden limb, once a unique marvel, began to feel like a gilded cage. In the dead of night, when Alara slept soundly, Silas would sometimes creep out of bed. He'd retrieve the special polishing kit he kept hidden and, by candlelight, lovingly buff the golden arm. He'd murmur to it things he never said to Alara: "My treasure, my prize, my most valuable asset." He'd imagine its weight in coins, the envy it inspired, the security it represented. This wasn't love for his wife. This was Gollum-level adoration for his precious. His secret rendezvous with the arm were becoming the most fulfilling part of his marriage. Years trickled by, each one gilding Silas's obsession further while tarnishing the warmth in their marriage. Alara, though always kind, grew more reserved, the golden arm a silent testament to the emotional distance between them. Silas, for his part, was too engrossed in his metallic fixation to notice or perhaps to care. He was comfortable, wealthy by association, and the arm was always there, gleaming, a constant reminder of his good fortune. Their life settled into a routine. Polite conversation, separate interests, and Silas's unwavering, silent devotion to gold. Then one autumn, as leaves turned the color of Alara's arm, she fell ill. A persistent cough, a growing weakness. Silas fussed, called for doctors, and wrung his hands with an impressive display of concern. But beneath the performance, a cold dread took root, not for Alara's life, bless his selfish heart, but for the fate of the golden arm. What if she departed? What would happen to it? His anxiety was palpable, but its true source remained his shameful secret. He'd pat her flesh-and-blood hand, all the while eyeing its glittering counterpart. Alara's condition, alas, did not improve. The doctors, grave-faced and solemn, spoke in hushed tones of fading strength and little hope. Silas listened, nodding sadly, his mind racing. He'd ask practical questions, cloaked in concern. "Will she need special arrangements?" he'd inquire, his gaze flicking to the arm. "Is there anything particularly valuable we need to secure?" The doctor, mistaking greed for grief-stricken practicality, simply sighed. Silas was already mentally drafting the inventory, and one item shone brighter than all the rest. The inevitable day arrived. Alara, her breathing shallow, her living hand cool in Silas's grip, opened her eyes one last time. She looked at him, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even pity in her gaze. "Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "be happy." He squeezed her hand, mumbled something about eternal love, but his eyes, traitorous as ever, darted to the golden arm, still and gleaming beside her. Then, with a final, gentle sigh, Alara was gone, and Silas was left alone, alone with his thoughts and a very valuable appendage. Silas, master of melodrama, launched into the performance of a lifetime. He donned the blackest black, his face a mask of theatrical woe so profound it could win awards. He wailed, he sobbed dryly, for the most part. He lamented his unbearable loss to anyone who'd listen, which was everyone, because who wouldn't pity a man who'd lost such a unique wife? The townsfolk clucked sympathetically, praising his devotion. He loved her so, they whispered, completely oblivious to the fact his deepest affections were reserved for something far less perishable. The funeral preparations were suitably lavish. The finest silks, the most expensive coffin with extra padding. Naturally, one couldn't be too careful with precious cargo, and a eulogy Silas penned himself, dripping with saccharine sentiment and conveniently omitting any mention of his primary interest. He supervised every detail, ensuring Alara's final presentation was impeccable, especially the positioning of her right arm. It was, he reasoned, the least he could do for his dearly departed investment. His grief was a masterpiece of calculated presentation. The funeral itself was a grand affair, a testament to Alara's standing in Silas's, well, his ability to spend her money. He stood graveside, the picture of desolation, occasionally letting out a well-timed, mournful sigh that echoed through the somber crowd. Internally, however, a different script was playing. He noted the depth of the grave, the type of soil, the proximity to the old oak tree for landmarking purposes. His mind wasn't on heavenly reunions. It was on a midnight excavation. The longest face at the funeral hid the most impatient of hearts. That night, sleep was a foreign concept to Silas. He paced his opulent bedroom, the silence of the manor amplifying the cacophony of his greedy thoughts. The image of the golden arm, buried beneath 6 feet of unforgiving earth, tormented him. It was an outrage, a waste, his treasure, his prize, left to the worms and the damp. By midnight, his feigned grief had entirely evaporated, replaced by a feverish resolve. He checked his tools, a sturdy shovel, a crowbar, a thick cloak. Operation Golden Retrieval was a go. Then, like a plot twist delivered by a gossipy milkmaid, a rumor reached Silas's eager ears. Whispers of a woman in a remote, mist-shrouded valley, young, fair, astonishingly wealthy, and possessing, get this, a right arm made of solid gold. Silas's eyes, usually narrowed in judgment, widened like saucers. Gold, real, actual gold, this wasn't just sparkle, this was a veritable supernova of matrimonial potential. Suddenly, the remote, mist-shrouded valley didn't seem so remote anymore. In fact, it sounded like the most charming destination on Earth. His quest had found its North Star, or rather, its gold arm. Under the cloak of a moonless, star-absent night, Silas crept out of the manor and towards the graveyard. The wind howled like a chorus of disapproving spirits, and every rustle of leaves sounded like an approaching constable. Or worse, an approaching Alara. He clutched his shovel tighter, his heart thumping a rhythm of gold, 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 don't get caught. The graveyard, eerie by day, was positively bone-chilling at night, tombstones like accusing fingers pointing at his nefarious purpose. The lure of gold was a powerful antidote to fear mostly. Finding Alara's fresh grave by the old oak tree was disturbingly easy. Then came the hard part. The shovel bit into the damp earth with a sickening squelch. Digging was strenuous, sweaty work, each spadeful an offense against decency. Silas, fueled by adrenaline and avarice, toiled away, pausing only to wipe his brow or cast a paranoid glance into the darkness. The sound of his own ragged breathing filled the silence, punctuated by the rhythmic scrape and thud of his grim labor. This was definitely not in the marriage vows. Finally, a dull thud, the coffin, with trembling hands and a crowbar. Silas pried open the lid. There she lay, peaceful in the lantern light, and there it was, gleaming dully even in the oppressive darkness, the golden arm. He wasted no time. With a grimace and a specialized tool he'd conveniently found, he performed the gruesome amputation. The arm came free with a sickening wrench. Silas clutched his prize, a grotesque parody of a triumphant hero, a wave of elation mixed with a sudden, chilling draft that had nothing to do with the night air. Clutching the surprisingly heavy golden arm beneath his cloak, Silas scrambled out of the grave and hastily refilled it, tamping down the earth with frantic, clumsy movements. He then scurried home, a grave-robbing, gold-loving goblin, the purloined limb cold against his chest. Back in the supposed safety of his manor, he washed the arm meticulously, polished it to a high sheen, and then, with a sigh of profound satisfaction, admired his ill-gotten treasure. "Mine," he whispered, "all mine at last." He felt no remorse, only the thrill of possession. That night, Silas decided the safest place for his new prized possession was under his pillow. After all, who would look there? He snuggled down, the cold, hard gold a strangely comforting presence beside his head. He was just drifting off, visions of counting gold coins dancing in his head, when a peculiar chill filled the room. The curtains rustled, though the window was closed. A floorboard creaked, though he was alone, or was he? Silas dismissed it as nerves, newly rich nerves. The next day, Silas tried to act normal, whatever normal is for a man who's just robbed his late wife's grave. He hummed a jaunty tune, inventoried his assets, the arm being top of the list naturally, and even considered throwing a small, celebratory dinner party for one. But a nagging unease pricked at him. He'd catch fleeting shadows from the corner of his eye, hear whispers that sounded suspiciously like Alara's gentle voice, and once he swore the golden arm, locked safely in his desk drawer, felt colder than usual. Paranoia, he told himself, definitely paranoia. Come nightfall, Silas's bravado was wearing thin. The manor felt colder, emptier, yet somehow more crowded. He decided the arm needed to be closer. For safekeeping, he muttered, though a part of him suspected he was daring something to happen. He retrieved the golden arm, its polished surface reflecting his own pale, worried face, and once again tucked it under his pillow. He pulled the covers up to his chin, telling himself it was just the autumn chill. He was wrong. It was much, much more than that. He was just teetering on the edge of a restless sleep when it happened. The temperature in the room plummeted. An unnatural, silent wind extinguished his bedside candle, and then a shimmering, ethereal light began to coalesce at the foot of his bed. It solidified, taking a familiar form, Alara, or rather the ghost of Alara. Pale, sorrowful, her form translucent, she glided silently towards his bedside, her eyes fixed on him with an expression of profound, heartbreaking reproach. Silas froze, a scream trapped in his throat. Silas, bless his rapidly liquefying courage, tried to feign nonchalance, a truly Herculean task when faced with your recently desecrated, now spectral wife. Alara, my dear, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. Bit late for a stroll, isn't it? The ghost merely stared, its sadness a palpable weight. Then, trying a different, perhaps accusatory tack, Silas blurted out, his voice trembling, What hast thou done with thy cheeks so red? It was a stupid question born of pure panic, but it was out there now. The ghost of Alara inclined her head slightly, her voice a hollow, echoing whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. All withered and wasted away, she intoned, a chilling gust of spectral wind accompanying her words. Silas shivered, pulling the blankets tighter as if they could offer any protection against the supernatural. His mind raced. This was not going according to any plan. He'd accounted for grave robbing, not for chatty, accusatory phantoms. His bravado was now a distant memory. Fueled by visions of glittering appendages and escalating social status, Silas embarked on his journey. It was less noble quest and more beeline to bling. He braved rickety bridges that swayed like drunken sailors, endured questionable roadside stew that tasted suspiciously of old boots, and even had a rather unfortunate encounter with a territorial badger he mistook for a fluffy kit. Through it all, the image of that golden arm gleamed in his mind's eye, a beacon of avarice guiding him through every muddy puddle and mosquito-infested swamp. Nothing, it seemed, could deter a man so singularly focused on, arm-wrestling fortune. Swallowing hard, Silas pressed on with his bizarre, fear-fueled interrogation. And what hast thou done with thy red rosy lips? He managed, his voice cracking. He half expected her to tell him she'd misplaced them, perhaps left them in the pantry. Again that mournful, ethereal voice filled the room, each word an icy shard. All withered and wasted away, she repeated, her spectral gaze unwavering. The repetition was unnerving, a ghostly litany of loss that seemed to directly accuse him of its cause. Silas began to sweat, despite the preternatural cold. He was on a roll now, a terrified, gibbering roll. And thy golden hair, Silas stuttered out, remembering how the sunlight used to catch its gleam, a gleam now entirely absent from her ghostly visage. He almost didn't want to hear the answer, but the question had a life of its own. The ghost's reply was as inevitable and chilling as the grave itself, all withered and wasted away. Her once vibrant blonde hair now hung limp and lifeless, a dull, spectral gray. Each answer chipped away another piece of Silas's composure, leaving him a trembling wreck. A dreadful pause hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Silas could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The ghost of Alara glided closer, her spectral form passing effortlessly through the edge of the bedside table. She was now looming directly over him, her sorrowful eyes seeming to pierce right through his soul, searching for something. Silas squeezed his eyes shut, wishing this was all a terrible nightmare, a figment of his guilt-ridden imagination. The icy cold pressing down on him was all too real. Then, with an intensity that belied her ethereal state, the ghost of Alara asked the one question Silas had been dreading, the question that cut straight to the heart of his greed and betrayal. Her voice, though still a whisper, seemed to boom in the oppressive silence of the room, each word a hammer blow. "And what?" She paused, her spectral finger slowly, deliberately pointing towards his pillow. "What hast thou done with thy golden arm?" The air crackled with unspoken accusation, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Before Silas could even think of a lie, before he could stammer out another pathetic excuse, the ghost of Alara fixed him with a gaze that held all the sorrow and knowledge of the afterlife. Her voice, no longer a whisper but a resonant, condemnatory toll, echoed through the room, shaking the very foundations of Silas's ill-gotten contentment. "Thou hast it." As she spoke, the golden arm beneath Silas's pillow suddenly felt like a block of burning ice, searing his skin through the linen. Silas screamed, a raw, animalistic sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Finally, Silas, muddier but no less determined, arrived in the fabled valley. It was picturesque, all babbling brooks and cottages spewing chimney smoke that smelled suspiciously like cookies. He made subtle inquiries, which for Silas meant loudly asking the first person he saw, "Heard tell of a lady with a rather shiny limb around here." The townsfolk, a surprisingly tight-lipped bunch when it came to their local golden-armed celebrity, mostly just pointed him vaguely towards a grand, slightly secluded manor on a hill. The anticipation was making Silas's palms sweat, or maybe that was just the humidity. And then he saw her, Alara. She was in the manor gardens, tending to roses, sunlight glinting off. Yes, there it was, a perfectly crafted, gleaming, solid gold right arm. It was magnificent. Oh, and Alara herself was quite lovely too, kind eyes, a gentle smile, hair the color of spun sunshine. But let's be honest, Silas's gaze was rather monopolized by the appendage that outshone the midday sun. He felt a flutter in his chest. Was it love, or the distinct ka-ching of a jackpot well spotted? Probably the latter, with a dash of "she's not bad-looking either." Silas, ever the opportunist, smoothed his coat, plastered on his most charming and entirely insincere smile, and made his approach. He was eloquence personified, a veritable Shakespeare of sweet nothings, all while mentally calculating the carat weight of her limb. Alara, sweet and perhaps a tad sheltered, was charmed by this worldly gentleman who seemed so interested in her. Little did she know his compliments about her radiant presence were mostly directed at her right bicep. The courtship was swift, a whirlwind of polite teas and garden strolls, with Silas expertly masking his Midas-like obsession. The wedding bells chimed, and Silas felt like the cat that got the cream, the canary, and the entire gold-plated birdcage. He stood at the altar, a vision of smug triumph, occasionally glancing at Alara, but mostly stealing peeks at the golden arm, now adorned with a delicate lace cuff he'd insisted upon to protect it, of course. As they exchanged vows, Silas promised to love, honor, and cherish, and in his head he added especially the shiny bit. He thought himself the luckiest man alive, and in a purely materialistic sense he probably was. Married life began, and to the outside world they were a picture of bliss. Silas played the doting husband, ensuring Alara had every comfort, especially comfort for her golden arm. He'd fetch a special velvet cushion for it at dinner, insist on her wearing gloves in chilly weather only on the golden one, naturally, and developed an almost neurotic habit of polishing it with a silk cloth when he thought she wasn't looking. Alara, bless her trusting heart, initially saw this as endearing quirkiness. "He's so attentive," she'd muse, unaware his attention was decidedly arm-centric. One sunny afternoon, Alara suggested a picnic by the river, envisioning a romantic outing. Silas, however, immediately pictured scratches, dents, or worse, river water tarnishing his his wife's precious arm. "The river, my dear," he'd said, aghast, "so damp, and what if you slipped? Think of the fragility." Alara, wanting to row a boat, was met with even more resistance. The oars so rough. His concern, so specific and intense, cast a small shadow over Alara's cheerful disposition. The picnic was relocated to the very safe, very dull drawing room.